Okay, we have learned a whole bunch about bottom-up sensation as it pertains to vision and audition, especially. A little bit about skin cells as well. Now we need to take the next step and understand more about perception, that top-down processing that happens with how our brain interprets and organizes information. Perception is what we look at next, and specifically, let's look at some of the things that affect our visual perception. We're going to walk through these things in the next part of the presentation, break all this stuff down, some important ideas to look at. That's just a quick introduction of some of the language. And the first thing to understand how we perceive anything visually, we have to understand that attention matters greatly. We've learned about attention before when studying memory, how important it is to pay attention to anything that you intend to remember. It's not just for memory, but anything that you want to be able to process, anything you want to be conscious of, anything you want to understand, you're going to have to pay attention to. So I got some examples for you. We're going to watch a couple of short YouTube videos together here. Follow the instructions carefully and keep score for yourself. Keep track. Keep an accurate count for what you're asked for here, and we'll discuss afterwards. Ready?
This is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball.
Now make sure you understand your instructions here. You're going to see a video recording of a bunch of people moving around and they're passing basketballs. Some of them are wearing white shirts, others are wearing black shirts. You are to count the number of basketball passes that come from a white shirted person. It doesn't matter who they pass the ball to. You're looking to see if you can selectively pay attention to the people wearing white shirts, and with everything going on, all the movement and all the confusion, we want to see how accurately you can count these passes coming from the people wearing white shirts. Ready?
How many passes did you count?
Give you a second to answer. Were you able to just pay attention to the people in the white shirts? Because if so, you were using selective attention, ignoring all the other stimuli, the people in the dark shirts, just kind of like filtering that information to the back of your brain and focusing solely on the white shirted people. Check out your answer here.
The correct answer is 15 passes.
Did you get it right? Next question.
But did you see the gorilla?
Now, I want you to notice I'm going to take the marker here for the video and move it back to the beginning of the video, and we're going to play it again. This time, don't count passes. This time, just watch the video as if you were watching a movie. You're not counting passes, just watch generally. And there we see a gorilla, well, a person in a gorilla suit walking right in the middle of what you were looking at. Did you notice the gorilla? Okay, this is very famous research done by Dan Simon and colleagues of his on the power of selective attention. And what Simon discovered was about 50% of the time, average people totally miss the gorilla. The gorilla that's in the middle of what you're looking at. Don't feel stupid if you miss the gorilla. Again, about 50% of the general population misses the gorilla when they're put in this situation, because that's what our brains do for us. When we are paying attention to one particular thing, people in white shirts passing basketballs, we are able to, in the moment, filter out using selective attention other information that is right in front of our face. Okay? This is called inattentional blindness. Inattentional blindness, meaning you can be completely blind of something that's right in front of your eyes simply because you're not paying attention to that thing. You're not expecting to see that thing, so you miss it, even though it's right in front of your face. This kind of thing, needs to be understood in addition to concepts like absolute threshold or difference threshold. Because consider, the idea of absolute threshold is as long as the information, as long as that stimulus, the guy in the gorilla suit, as long as he's a powerful enough stimulus, he's going to cause a sensation. He's going to make us notice him. Yeah, that makes sense, generally speaking. However, absolute threshold doesn't explain everything, like inattentional blindness. Even though the guy in the gorilla suit is a powerful signal in our environment, for half the people or about half the time, that powerful, obvious stimulus does not register in our conscious mind because that's not what we're told to pay attention to. Okay? I'll go to dad mode again real quick. This is another reason why we should never be texting while driving. People will say, well, I hold my phone up so I can still see the road while I'm texting something. No, if you're looking at your phone, you can certainly see the road in the background, but that doesn't mean you're going to see a little kid rolling in front of you on their tricycle. For Pete's sake, you just had a gorilla walk right in front of your eyes, and I'm guessing some of you did not see him. Okay, because based on the research, it happens quite a bit. All right, now that you've seen that, let's try a similar test. Now you know what to expect. So let's consider this part 2. Let's, again, test the power of selective attention. You're going to be given
The monkey business illusion.
a similar task.
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
Same instructions. It's a different video, but just notice this time, if you can, count the white shirted passes as accurately as before, but see if this time you do notice the gorilla. Don't let it make you lose count, but see if the gorilla is more noticeable this time, even as you're counting passes from white shirted players. Now that we know what to expect for sure, see what happens. Ready? How many passes?
The correct answer is 16 passes.
16 this time. Were you able to keep an accurate count of the white shirted passes? And were you able to see the gorilla that walked through the scene that time, even while keeping an accurate count? If you could, congratulations. Your selective attention still worked for you, but because you were primed and you knew to expect the gorilla, maybe you caught him that time. Let me rewind this one for you. Let's go back, same video, and play it. This time, you know the drill. Just watch like a normal movie this time. Don't count passes. Just watch the movie. Check out the blonde lady over here to the right. She's going to dip out of the scene. Did you notice that last time? And look at the color of the curtain in the background. How about that? Did you see that last time? I bet some of you didn't see that last time. That curtain in the background, right before your eyes, just changed from red to orange. Did you see it happen originally? happen right before your eyes. And that's a pretty big stimulus right in front of your eyes. Not only did one of the participants leave off the screen, but the curtain in the background changed in front of your eyes. Inattentional blindness, folks. Inattentional blindness. If you were tricked by this one, again, Simon notices about half the population does not notice this change when it happens. This because you're not paying attention to it. Look, the lady who left the screen, it's not a coincidence she was wearing a black shirt because you were instructed to ignore the people in black shirts. By the way, the guy in the gorilla suit is wearing a black gorilla suit. Your mind was ignoring the color black. That's not a coincidence here. You know, if you were given the same instructions and a white polar bear walks through the scene, you're going to notice the polar bear because that's what you were primed to look for, things in white. Okay? So another term to add here, we've got inattentional blindness, an effect of selective attention. We also now see an example of change blindness. Change blindness. That's what it's called when a change can happen right in front of a person's eyes, but because they're not paying attention to that change, they don't notice it, like a curtain right in front of your eyes changing from red to orange. But because you're paying attention to the white-shirted basketball passers, that change goes completely unnoticed, at least in some of you. Okay, change blindness, another effect of selective attention. We'll do one more example. This is fun, right? See how you do.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
Did you notice anything? Just a weird little whodunit scene, right? Check this out.
It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
21 changes. Watch this from a different perspective.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
Did you notice all those changes? The detective has a totally different color coat. The body is a completely different person. Sure, things like the tablecloth and the flowers changed over here. Every time the camera moved in one direction, something off camera drastically changed. But most of us don't notice those changes, at least not most of the changes, because of change blindness. We don't know to pay attention to all those things right from the beginning. They don't stick out to us as being important. So it's really easy to miss them when they change practically before our eyes. And here's a nice little public service announcement for you. How about it? Look out for people on bikes. Or how about, let's not text and drive. Let's be smart. Knowing the power of selective attention, which, is an evolutionary advantage for us to have this power to, look at something and totally ignore something so obvious right in front of our eyes because we determine it to be unimportant in the moment. It's not what we're expecting. It's not what we're looking out for. That can be very helpful to us to filter out unnecessary information in our lives. It can also be super dangerous, especially when behind the wheel of a car. I hate to keep lecturing you, but let's be safe out there, shall we, everybody? Alrighty, folks. Continue with perception here. We've gone over this stuff before, much earlier in our year, but take a look at this slide really quickly and remember, when it comes to visual perception, there are these Gestalt principles of grouping. I'm not going to go over all of them again. We've done this before. You can pause this and remind yourselves if you need to how these principles, affect our visual perception of things that we might see as being grouped together, whether they really are or not. We'll move on quickly to figure ground perception. This is always pretty fun. Figure ground illusions are illusions that play with foreground versus background, because here's the fact. Your brain or mind, they're always working for you. Tell me if you ever heard this before. To make sense of things, right? Well, one of the things your brain is always making sense of is determining visually what's the foreground, like what's the focal point of a thing. That would be the figure, the focal point, versus what's in the background. Figure ground perception. Your mind, your brain is always doing this for you, distinguishing between focal point versus background. Here's my second favorite example of that, the FedEx logo. A lot of you probably know this already, but if you don't, you get the duct tape ready again. This is going to blow your mind. The FedEx logo, the focal point, the figure of this logo is obviously supposed to be the letters, FedEx. When you see a truck go by, a FedEx truck, you notice the letters, you read it, you know what's happening there. Somebody's mailing a package, whatever. You get excited if a FedEx truck pulls up to your house and package is being delivered. The letters in the logo are probably the intended figure, the focal point. Have you ever noticed, folks, the white arrow in the FedEx logo? Check this out. You have to look in the white, the negative space between the E and the X. It's been there all along. How many times, whether this is the first time you're noticing it or remember back to the first time you noticed it, how many times did you see this logo without noticing the white arrow? Because that white arrow is in the background of this logo. It's not supposed to be the focal point. Now, you can make it the focal point by focusing on the white arrow. That white arrow becomes the figure. And what happens to the FedEx letters? They, in your mind, fall into the background. This is figure ground perception. Your mind distinguishing at any moment what we should be focusing on as the figure versus what's in the background. And oftentimes you can make your mind switch. You can flip. That white arrow was in the background for so long, and then once it's pointed out to you, once you see it, hey, good luck not seeing this white arrow from now on. Holy moly. It's all you're going to see. Once it's pointed out to you, every time a FedEx truck goes by now, you're going to go, white arrow, there it is, sticking out like a sore thumb. I can't not see it. That white arrow has now become the figure, and the letters are the background. But if you force yourself to focus on the letters, then they will become the figure again in your mind, and the white arrow falls into the background, and you can flip back and forth in your mind. Here's my favorite, of course, because the greatest hockey team of all, and they're going to win the championship this year if they restart hockey season, as they're talking to. Have you ever noticed the eagle in the Washington Capitals logo here? Obviously an eagle, right? Have you noticed that it's also in the shape of a W for Washington? It's a team that plays in DC, the Washington Capitals. The eagle is in the shape of a W. So, maybe you missed the W. That's cool. How about the white area underneath the eagle? Do you notice? It's kind of in the shape of the Capitol Dome, because it's the Washington Capitals. And this is like the Capitol Dome of Congress, right? Just hanging out in the negative space, the white space in the bottom of the eagle. That's a figure ground illusion. Our eyes are drawn to the colorful eagle. It's kind of cool looking. That's the figure. But in the background, is the Capitol dome. Unless you focus on the white negative space there, then that becomes the figure, and the eagle is the background, and you can flip back and forth to do it. Here's one of the most famous examples of this. What do you see? Is it a vase or vase, if you want to get fancy? Is it a chalice or, a fancy goblet, cup? Or is it two faces looking at each other? Are they two profiles? The answer is both. It all determines on what are you focusing on as the figure. Are you focusing on the gray areas? Is that the figure? And therefore this is a red wall in the background? Then you're going to see faces as the figure. Or are you staring at the red image? That's not a wall at all. That's a cup, a chalice in the foreground. That's the figure. And this is a gray wall in the background. Then they won't look so much like faces. You can flip-flop between them. Do you see what's going on here? Do you see the skull? A lot of people see the skull first. Looks like a round skull here with two eye sockets, a nasal cavity and teeth. But no, it's kind of a ghostly female figure looking into a vanity. She's looking into the mirror, kind of looking at us. And in the reflection of the mirror, these are just a couple of curtains open with a candle in the window. These are just cosmetics on her vanity. So what is it? Is it a skull? Or is it a lady looking in the mirror at us creepily? It's both, depending on what you focus on as the figure versus the background. And keep in mind, your brain is always doing this for you, just in less conscious ways. Over here, do you see the old colonel, right? Kind of a profile again with his bald head and his wispy hair. We see his mustache, beard, his prominent nose. He's got a hand on his chest, right? His tassels on his shoulder, wearing a uniform of some kind. Or try to ignore the old man's face. Let his face fall into the background. Focus on the old man here, kind of wearing a sombrero. Do you see the old man's face and his white beard as he's standing in an archway? This isn't an old man. This isn't the colonel's head. This is just an archway. And here's a younger woman holding a baby with her golden dress on. It looks like there's like hay just blowing through the archway or something. That's not hair of a colonel. That's hay just blowing through an archway. And this is a dog. I hope he's sleeping in the street. Hope he's not dead. It's not a hand on a chest. It's a dog laying in a street. Can you see both images depending on what you focus on as the figure versus the ground? It's figure ground perception. Now, figure ground perception is closely related to something called the cocktail party effect or cocktail party phenomenon. But this is something that deals with hearing, not vision. I want to link these ideas together. They are very similar ideas, but figure ground perception, if we see that terminology, is related to visual experience. The cocktail party effect is related to hearing. This all starts, to make sense of this concept, it starts with knowing what a binaural sound experiment is. Researchers have done these studies where they put headphones on a person. Check out this guy. He's all Rico Suave, right? Like, looking good. No, not even. But anyway, they put headphones on a person and they put a different signal, a different sound in one ear versus the other. Like they'll tell, Joe Cool over here, they'll say, I want you to listen to the recipe that's going to be in one ear. There's a recipe for baking a cake. I want you to listen to the ingredients and how to bake the cake. Ignore the information in your other ear. So he's got the headphones on, and in one ear, he's getting the sound of how to bake this cake, the ingredients, the steps to do, temperature of the oven, all that stuff. In the other ear, he's hearing a story about World War II, like the Normandy invasion, okay? He's got to ignore that sound to pay attention to the cake baking. And generally speaking, what the researchers find is that people are really good at doing this, ignoring the one sound. And by the way, both stories, both narratives are at the same volume with the same tone of a speaker, right? You might think a person be overwhelmed, and they could be, but generally speaking, they can, again, use their selective attention to tune out the unattended channel, the World War II story, just ignore it, and tune into the story they're told to pay attention to. This is like figure ground perception with hearing, okay? So there's this thing called modified filter theory, which basically states that what we're doing in a state like that is our brains are, tell me if this sounds familiar, basically turning up in our minds, in consciousness, turning up one signal and turning down the other, putting the other signal in our background. Again, figure, ground, perception in a sense, just with hearing. And it's important that we think of it as figure and ground, because what the researchers went on to discover was the unattended channel was not turned off. Okay, this filter theory, modified filter theory, says that the stuff we're not paying attention to is not turned off in our mind, it's just turned down. It's put in the background, because here's what they did. They got this guy, Joe Cool here with the headphones, they got him listening to the cake baking directions, ignoring the World War II story. But if they put his name into the World War II story, they're not screaming his name, they're just saying it like once in a while, right? When the Allied forces landed on Omaha Beach, Joe, what they discovered, Joe, was that they were outnumbered by blah, 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 whatever. Joe hears his name being said, even though he's mostly able to follow along with the cake baking instructions, he'll know that his name was said, okay? Because it turns out we will turn up any information that we deem important. And generally, when someone says our name, that's important to us. So we're going to turn that information up in our consciousness, at least for a second, and turn the cake baking instructions down in our consciousness temporarily, and then maybe go back and turn the World War II story down in our mind and turn the cake baking up. This ability, folks, to pluck out some stimuli from our environment and pay attention to them with our hearing, while ignoring all the surrounding stimuli, that's the cocktail party phenomenon. That's the technical term for it. The idea is, and I guess some psychologists thought of this while being at a cocktail party on campus somewhere. Well, hello, Buffy, how are you? How's the yacht doing for you, really, mama? Imagine having hundreds of people hanging out at this cocktail party. Well, Professor whatever is talking to Buffy about the yacht. Buffy's not yelling, Buffy's not screaming at the top of her lungs, but the professor is able to turn up in his mind Buffy's voice and focus and pay attention to Buffy's conversation while putting all the surrounding voices into the background of his mind. It's fun to talk like that. Maybe not for you. Sorry you have to listen to this. Does that make sense though? The cocktail party phenomenon is like figure ground perception. As we're talking to this one person at the party, even though their voice is not as loud as all the surrounding voices combined together, we can focus on that one voice as our figure, our focal point. And we put all those other collective voices in the background. But at any given moment, if something happens in the background, someone says our name or they start telling a crazy story, we'll start paying attention to that conversation. That will become our focal point, and Buffy over here will fall into the background of our consciousness. Figure ground. Cocktail party effect. We see the stadium full of people here. Look, if you're ever at a game like this, there could be 70,000 people at this stadium. You've got a friend next to you holding a conversation with you. What's louder, that one friend's voice or the 70,000 people surrounding you all together? Of course, the 70,000 voices are collectively louder than your friend's one voice. But thanks to the cocktail party phenomenon, you're able to focus on your friend's voice as long as you choose to pay attention to it and pluck that voice out of the crowd, putting the crowd's noise in the background. One last example of this is the cocktail party effect. Listen to music sometimes with lots of instruments, like an orchestral piece or something. You could listen to the whole song globally and experience it that way. But sometimes, even if it's a pop song or rock song, hip hop, whatever, see if you can focus on one particular sound. If it's an orchestra, see if you can focus on just the cellos or just the trumpet section. If you can do that, that's the same effect here. You have all these instruments playing in your ears, but you're able to selectively pay attention to that one particular instrument, letting all the other instruments fall into the background of your mind. Another example of selective attention. With hearing, that's the cocktail party phenomenon. Okay, there are other elements of perception, folks, but we'll start that in another recording here in just a second. I'm going to stop this recording, try to keep these recordings kind of shorter for you. So let's do that.